Welcome to the Strategy Skills Podcast. I'm your host, Kris Safarova, and the show is brought to you by our firm, firmsconsulting.com, the team behind strategytraining.com. And today we have with us Shirin Behzadi, who is Iranian American entrepreneur, author, former CEO of Home Franchise Concepts, where she scaled the company to nearly 1 billion in sales across 12,000 cities. Very few people can say something like that. And today she serves as a speaker, advisor, and investor. Shirin, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Shirin, so you went from gas station cashier to scaling a $1 billion company. What do you think was the single hardest decision you had to make that got you where you are today?
Wow, a lot of hard decisions. I think the road is paved with hard decisions. I want to say staying true and focused on where I wanted to go, which was, I knew even then as a gas station cashier, and I said that to people, that someday I was going to run a big company. So that informed my decisions along the way. So when you go back to asking, where are those junctures? Where are some tough decisions? The tough decisions had to do with saying no to some opportunities because I wanted to be on the path that I wanted to be, which is to get to running a big company. I did well with jobs that I was in and decided to leave those jobs because they were not consistent with where I wanted to go. For some time, the jobs were fantastic and effective, and I learned a lot from them. But then we reached a point where I had to make a decision. Do I continue working as a CFO or for a corporation or any of that, or do I take a step out and do something on my own? That's a tough decision to make, especially for someone that comes from the background that I came from, which is not just working at a gas station. I was a teenager on my own, no parents, very little money, a lot of financial insecurity. So making a decision to leave safety to explore and want to build something on my own was tough. And I made that decision over and over again.
And this is so critical what you said. I hope everyone got that insight because we are so busy. Some people are listening while driving and so on. Be careful, guys, if you're driving. But this is such a critical insight that you set that goal for yourself at the very beginning. And then you reverse engineered what it will take for you to get there.
Yes, I wanted to say that it was, and we now use the word vision. I didn't have the word for it at the time, but I could just see myself. It was like, I'm going to someday. I used to say back then, of course, General Motors was, the company to think about and talk about. It was so large. I was like, maybe not General Motors, but I'll run a big company. And so therefore, when I was working, let's say as an accountant, I learned a lot. It's important. I think accounting is foundationally so important in understanding business. But when I reached a point where I thought, well, if I'm going to stay here, am I going to continue to be a better, let's say in that case, an auditor? Is that what I want? Or if my goal, if my vision is to someday run a big company, maybe I need to learn operations too. Do you see how that would inform your decision? Had it been early on, I wanted to be a fantastic CPA, then the road would have been very different.
Where do you think that vision came from, that you wanted to run a big company?
Yes, that's a very good question. I'm not sure, but it was not just a dream, it was an expectation. It was knowing that it was going to happen. If I were to guess, it has a lot to do or had a lot to do with childhood and growing up in a very challenging environment, right? I grew up in Iran part of my life. I left as a young teenager on my own. And maybe it was about having learned through those trials and tribulations that I had resilience, that I started building resilience. And then I understanding that I can problem solve. Maybe I can manage situations that are seemingly dire, right? I was in Turkey alone. As a 17-year-old, didn't speak the language. Learning that I found my way through them could have set the stage to saying, why not? I can then run a big company. If I could survive on my own, not having ever been on my own, with very little money in a country that I didn't know, no parents. If I could survive that and find my way to the United States and find my way to a gas station and survive all of it, what is it that I can't do? Maybe I can run a big company.
If you try to go back to that time, do you remember how that thought came to you?
Okay, you're going to maybe laugh at this, maybe not, but a couple of things. I do have an actual vivid memory that I wrote about in my book, by the way. It's one of the memories that just, you know how sometimes memories just stick out in your mind? I remember the gas station I worked at was a bulletproof gas station. It was not in a nice neighborhood. Like you had, it was dead bolted and bulletproof. And I would take my textbooks with me because I worked full time, right? So as I was studying for my accounting degree, I didn't have a lot of time. So I would take my textbook and between customers, I would study. A gentleman walked up to give me his cash and said, "What are you studying over there?" And at the time I was a math major, I hadn't switched yet. So I had a calculus book. And I said, "I'm studying calculus." And he said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" You know, because a young girl at a bulletproof gas station as a cashier, obviously poor. I looked straight at him and I said, "I'm going to run a big company." And he just laughed at me. He goes, "Oh my gosh, okay, good luck with that." Walked away. But that was the first time I would say I openly uttered it. And then I decided I was going to print a business card. So that may sound funny, but I was working at a gas station, but I printed the business card for myself as if almost to have a tangible evidence that I was going to run a big company. I didn't print a business card that says I'm a gas station attendant. I was a CEO already on that business card.
I can resonate so much with your story. I also was a teenager without any support, immigrated. And in fact, I was looking for my first job for something like 8 months, applying for every job. And one of those interviews was at a gas station. And I was asked to do some Excel work as a test, and they locked me in the room. They actually locked the door, so that was very scary. And it was very bad neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
Very dangerous neighborhood as well. So I really can resonate with what you felt because you are literally in a situation where you often don't have money to buy even bread to eat. And yet you are able to think big. And I was the same way as you. So that is incredible. I'm looking forward to see how our conversation will unfold. So take us to that moment. So you are printing those cards. What happens next? What is your next move?
So like I said, I was a math major and then realized language of business is accounting. So I decided to switch to accounting. And then I went to a state school, a great state school, but not necessarily on top of the list of business schools, you know. So I learned there was Big 8 back then, not to age myself, but I thought, okay, well, I want to get a job with one of the Big 8. And somebody said, internships help with that. So I went to the career office and I asked them about internships with a Big 8 accounting firm. And she was very pleasant. She just said, you know, you can try, but I don't want you to get disappointed. Those firms don't usually recruit from here, and especially not for internships because those are fewer positions. So this was one of my first lessons learned in, you know, it's good to hear people out, but oftentimes they give you advice that may be coming from their own way of being, perhaps their limitations, their fears, whatever it may be. So you take what you hear and you assess it and decide whether or not it's the right decision for you. I thought, well, that may be her opinion, but I'm going to go for it. So I did. And I was granted an internship with EY, one of the only 8 positions in greater LA area, which is huge. And from there, of course, doors opened. When it was time then to get a full-time job, I had offers from all the Big 8. The fact that I had worked full-time at a gas station and then the later years I moved on and added more to my list of things that I did helped, because it was clear that I was so enthusiastic, interested in wanting to do good work, And of course, at EY, as soon as I got in there, I was keen on getting the toughest clients, not toughest in the way of in degree of difficulty, like how much more can I learn here? How quickly can I learn? How much more can I learn? And from that point on, that's basically what I opted in to do. Learn, learn, learn.
I think we need to unpack a little bit the part between you working at the gas station and you getting into a school and being able to study and work. Can you elaborate a little bit on that part of the journey? Because those are the toughest days.
Those are tough times, yes. But in order to explain that, well, you've got to go, in my case, go back to where I came from. And so in growing up in Iran, I was there when the government was toppled and the new regime, which is now the Islamic Republic, took over. So I saw that transition, and in the process of that transition as a young person, we were caught in the middle of a lot of chaos and change. So I was arrested a couple of times because that's what happened in Iran at the time, and witnessed lots of atrocities, lots of challenges, and of course the war. So when my parents decided to send me out of the country, it wasn't because it was a nice journey to take on. It was because literally it felt like survival depended on it. And so before I knew it, and really seemingly overnight, it wasn't overnight, I was sent to Turkey on my own, by myself. To find my way out of Turkey, not that there's anything wrong with Turkey, it's great, it's a great country to visit, but where I ended up was in a very tough neighborhood in Istanbul, because that's where you went when you were going over, without a lot of preparation. And where I stayed was in a home that a woman ran. So very quickly, I had to learn to be independent on my own and find my way through. I didn't even have a passport. So as I was solving for all of these, I knew that one of the only ways out of Istanbul, probably the only way out of Istanbul to the United States, especially because of the terrible relationships the Islamic Republic had with the West, was through college admission. So it was through basically the school that I went to, because I went to the school for the gifted. Folks that were connected with the United States did find admission for me to a college in the United States. So that's how I came here. But of course, couldn't afford that. It was a private school, and found my way through lots of, twists and turns to be able to go to a state school. And of course, I had to support myself. That's how it all happened.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're starting at one of the big 8.
Yes.
You work very hard. What happens next? How do you go from there to becoming CFO at 28?
Yes. I worked at EY, loved it. I thought it was a really, really good experience, fantastic. And I took on, like I said, a lot of really good, interesting, complicated clients, learned a lot. I was getting a lot of really good reviews and feedback, until one day I was working at a banking client, and I had some time to think, and I had an epiphany. I thought, if I were to stay here much longer, I'm going to become really, really good at auditing. But is that what I want? I also looked at people ahead of me, right? Because that's an indication. Unfortunately, at the time, not a lot of women. Now there are, and so that's a good thing. But at the time, no. And I knew very clearly that someday I wanted to be a mother. This is where I think, for me, having a core value has really literally saved my life, and also has created my ability to build what I wanted. My core value was that I wanted to be an engaged mother. I always said I wanted to be a mother who happened to work, not a working mother. So between those two factors, one, understanding that I was becoming more skilled at being an auditor and not necessarily an operator, and that I didn't look like it was an environment that allowed me to be an engaged mother, I had to make a very difficult decision. I decided to move on. And I remember it was extremely emotional, very difficult, kind of shocking for the partners that I was working with because I was doing so well. Like, why would you leave now? But I, through EY, found a position at one of our clients. The client of EY's that was looking, and I was introduced to them. Started off not in as a CFO. I started off working in their loan servicing as a mortgage bank, and I explain more of that in the book. But basically, the overarching story is that I learned a lot, and as the organization went through growth, the CFO left for a different position, and I opted in, and I asked our CEO if he could see me. Of course, the previous CFO thought I would be a good fit, but I didn't come from the accounting department, so that was a kind of a lateral move in a weird way. And again, coming back to the idea of people said, "Don't go ask. It may backfire," and I thought, I'm going to ask. Like I did with the internship, I'm like, I'm going to ask. So I did, and I became CFO of a pretty good sized mortgage bank. We had $1 billion of loan servicing. We were originating $100 million of loans a month. And this is like the 90s. So those were big numbers, a big job, a lot of learning. And through that process, not only did I learn more about the world of mortgage banking and finance, but also operations, because we also had 22 branches. Like I said, we had a loan servicing portfolio. So that's a lot of operations that go into play. Great learning experience.
It is. When I was in banking, I used to manage a portfolio of over $1 billion, and that just highlights how much responsibility I was carrying on my shoulders. If you were part of a company and you were CFO of that company and you guys were managing a portfolio of that size, it comes at a big cost. So that is incredible. So what happens next? So you become CFO, and I love the part that you asked the CEO. I think that's another big learning moment I want to highlight for everyone. We need to use the opportunities like that. You have to speak up, you have to ask, and they may say yes.
Right. So because I knew I was a good fit, I knew it. If I thought I'm overreaching, it would be a different, of course I'm overreaching, but not overreaching. I was reaching for a higher position, but it wasn't an overreach. I thought I was a good fit. And I knew that I had the best interest of the company and the accounting department in mind. So actually, when I did go in and ask, and didn't take a minute, like he was like, what have you been waiting for? My relationship with the accounting department, with the controller and so on from that point on was fantastic. So it was obviously the right fit, and I had noticed it. So from there, when we continued to grow, we were a mortgage bank. So our main product was mortgages. Interest rates went up quite a bit, and that wreaks havoc into the whole industry, and especially in our case, because looking back, a mortgage bank was effectively one product company, variations of that product, but it's definitely more dependent on, you don't have a range of services per se that you offer. So we had a decision to make, because with the increase, the business was severely impacted. So we had to figure out how to best continue to service these loans, and how do we best manage the company with the significant drop in business. The final decision was to sell it to a bigger bank. And so we worked that out. I worked with the transition. I worked with the negotiations, which was a great experience, and then worked through the transition. And then I had another choice to make. At the beginning of this conversation, you did say, what are those decisions? This was another decision point. So now I've been with EY, and then pretty quickly I've become CFO of a pretty good sized mortgage bank. And now I have this experience of transactions and selling and blah, 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 all of that good work. I could have found another CFO position. That would have made sense. But by then I had one child, and I thought, okay, maybe it's time to pursue what I had set out to pursue, which was to be more of an entrepreneur. So I decided that I was going to go out on my own. Now, I figured there are companies that would be looking for someone who could be their, call it, offsite CFO. And that wasn't a thing then. There are many great organizations now that do it, but back then it wasn't that well known. So I didn't quite know how to build it, but I ended up building it. And in that process, I came across the company where I stayed at for 20 years. Yes, and it was scary, because you know that, because I now had left, and it sounds, in hindsight, you go, well, it worked out, but for the first few years, it did not work out, right? It was a lot of trials and tribulations, and asking yourself, doubting yourself, going, why did I do this? And your peers are moving up, like the ones that had stayed at EY are now like doing fantastically well. And you ask yourself, why did I sign up for this again? Am I doing the right thing? Yeah.
How did you land this particular client? Because initially it was a client and you were a CFO there. How did you land that client?
They were looking for a relatively small project, it seemed like. And I'm not sure, somebody introduced us. I met them on the phone, then I met them in person. And then as I left, I realized, these are good people, and I feel like there's room for growth. It wasn't obviously a big company yet. It was doing okay, but it wasn't like enormous. And I thought, I think they're missing financial management. That's where, the question is, where are you going to go and how are you going to get there? It's one thing to feel you want to go somewhere, but it's another to actually be able to manage and measure and all of that. So later on, when they called me, that is what I told them. I said, I think you need someone to help you with financial management. And then, it just happened seemingly gradually. We started off working, fewer hours and fewer engagements, and it just grew from there. We became friends, and I also knew that I had more to add, that there was that spirit of entrepreneurship that I had would be useful here. It was. We worked very, very well as a team.
So to step a little bit back, when you went on your own, you mentioned those were a few difficult years.
Yes.
How did you approach client acquisition during that period?
That was the toughest thing, right? Where do you start? Who do you start with? Luckily, I had, even though I'd been really busy and helping build the previous bank and, operating as a CFO, I had just had a child, but I had managed to meet people, meet connections through all of that. And somehow I had remained in touch with them. So first thing I did was, okay, Shirin, this is the Rolodex era, right? So just go through it and let people know that you're available and ready to do this. And as it happens, it's, you start spreading your wings and you cast a wide net and people show up. I want to say that probably my first client came in because of it was a woman that worked with banks. She did consulting work with banks with regards to all kinds of instruments. So I had told her, and she had met a group that was looking for someone like me, and she connected us. And so it kind of grew from there. One of the challenges, that was the first client. Well, one of the challenges was lack of awareness. Because right now people are talking about offsite or fractional C executives. That is something people are aware of, but back then they weren't. So it wasn't like people were out there, maybe some, but not very common. It wasn't like people are out there specifically looking for working with headhunters or whomever, find me a fractional CFO or an offsite CFO. That wasn't the situation. So it was a bit more education too that I had to do.
Of course. And you were a mom at the same time, running your own business, just starting out your own business. That is very, very hard.
very hard.
Let's fast forward now. You're working as a CFO with the company you ended up working with for 20 years. What happens there? How do you build the kind of relationships where they say, you know what, you should lead this company?
So when we started working together, like I said, we were just working on making sure they're set up right. And as we started digging in, I was able to be engaged with conversations with them internally about growth plans, operations. It was clear that what I brought to the table, it was one of the elements that helped them. So when you have various people taking on various responsibilities, there are gaps. And that was one of the gaps that basically I filled. And it wasn't just an accounting gap. It was not just a financial gap. It was also financial and operations management that we could all work together. One thing about an entrepreneurial company in its growth phase, in its early stages, is that positions may be called one thing, but they're in reality very different. People basically roll up their sleeves and do what needs to be done in a lot of ways. And that's exactly how we did things. We were friends, we would do lunch every day, and we would collaborate on a lot because we were of the size that we could collaborate. And for the first few years, it was tough. It was tough because anybody who's ever built anything knows growth, it doesn't come overnight. For some people, there are unicorns in the market, but most of us have to earn it. And it was really trying to figure out how to grow more rapidly. We were growing gradually, but not at a pace that we wanted to. So it wasn't until maybe 4 years I had been there that we landed on what I call it the secret sauce, which is like what unlocked the growth potential for us. From that point, we started growing pretty rapidly in the world of franchising, and eventually asked ourselves, do we continue to grow and grow this system, or do we get into other ways of doing business? Do we do manufacturing? Do we do retail? Or do we do more franchising? And we realized that perhaps we liked and thought we were good at franchising. So we created yet another franchise system from the ground up, both in the home, I would say home improvement space, not home services, mostly home improvement because they're more heavy. And then the Great Recession hit. And so that was very difficult. It was definitely an existential crisis because the whole market, of course, fell apart. But it was, if you remember, Great Recession was housing led, and we were in home improvement. Like, who would be spending money improving their homes if they're losing their homes? So how do you manage that? How do you recover from that? After the initial shock, really figuring out, okay, what do we do with this now? How do we best still reach out to customers that may be willing? There would be a smaller group, but may be willing to do it. How do we create products, programs, warranties, pricing that would appeal to them? We needed to make some enhancements and changes. How do we change our marketing to reach out to them in a different language that we had been used to? So we basically had to go through a lot of ways of doing business. How do we support our franchises in this very tumultuous environment? We went through a lot of facets of the business and enhanced it all, changed it all to be able to adjust to the new way of doing business. And of course, that was one of the reasons we were able to then, once the market recovered, for us to grow really rapidly. So this is why I always talk about adversity is a superpower. It doesn't sound like it, but that's the story of my life, and definitely the story of the Great Recession. Dealing with that adversity, facing it, growing through it, was one of the toughest things we had done, but basically one of the best ways to grow beyond, because our trajectory was significantly higher after we came out of it. That, of course, was met with lots of personal challenges. It was a very difficult era for me. I lost my father, I lost my loving nephew, and then I was diagnosed with brain tumor that I had to deal with while going through all of this.
I'm so sorry you had to go through so much. I'm very sorry about passing of your father and the surgery you had to go through. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Thank you.
What were some of the most important things that you adjusted? So you mentioned you figured out, okay, there are still clients who want what we offer. So how do we reach them and what do we offer them that they want? What were some of the most effective decisions there or things you uncovered?
Yes. So in the world of franchising, you definitely do a lot of marketing work nationally, right? Franchisees pay into national advertising fund, use those funds effectively to advertise on behalf of the system. They also spend dollars locally on their own local advertising. So there's a lot of marketing that goes on, obviously, to the consumer. Prior to the Great Recession, our messaging was perhaps a little bit more branding than anything else. Once the Great Recession was here and we saw a significant drop in business, we had to really get sharp and focused on generating leads. So we used to say, what would make the phone ring? Because the phone would ring at the time, right? We switched almost all of our efforts to most like direct response, which was effective. It took some time, but it worked because we were able to then generate leads for our franchisees that kept them in business. So the other efforts that we took on had to do with making sure franchises are supported. Not that we didn't support them, we supported them really, really well, but it was a different kind of support that they needed this time around. It made us better actually at understanding what is the most effective way of supporting them. Yes, train them to install, yes, train them to design, but also train them to figure out their own financial health. How can we best teach them to go from a lead to your closing rate, and how do you close that gap? How do you make your closing rate better? How do you make sure you go back to the leads that you had generated and recoup some of the leads that you may have lost? So you're really getting more granular with the kind of support they needed in order to run their business, which wasn't done with as much detail as we started doing from that point on. Of course, we also had all kinds of financial aid for them that we introduced, including royalty relief and other approaches that we took on, which meant less to the bottom line of the company, but it helped keep people in business. And a clean sweep, like I said earlier, of our offerings. What is the customer looking for today was the question we asked ourselves. And how do we make sure that we get as close to what they're looking for? How do we bring in our suppliers, our manufacturers, to help us create those products and programs? So we went back to the negotiation table with our suppliers and manufacturers and made it clear that in order for them to survive, we would have to survive. Our franchisees would have to survive. So wouldn't it be better if we all got together and partnered in this process? We designed warranties, programs. We created pricing that was more attractive to the customers. We just got better at running our own business, to be honest.
And what did you discover that customers wanted?
This is the customer of 2008, which is a very different customer that we have today. But even then, they were very interested in making changes to enhance their home without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. So some of our products that we offered Americans at the time were moving every 4 to 7 years. Right? Well, because of the Great Recession, that wasn't quite a possibility because there was not enough equity left in their homes and so on. So people were not moving as much. But that didn't mean that they didn't need to enhance their homes. So how do we come up with products that would help them enhance at a reasonable, affordable price? And how do we let them know that these products exist? That's basically the problem we solved for.
Shirin, and how did you guys figure it out that is what they wanted? Did you speak to potential customers or current customers, or did maybe look at research on the industry?
One of the beauties of franchising done right is that you have people that are facing and talking to their local people all the time, right? So in the case of a franchise system, you have a franchisee that has a finite number of households in their area. They're known in their area if they do it right. They're involved in their communities. They're baseball coaches and, as, are around their customers on a daily basis. A good franchise system is one that has a feedback loop. So those franchisees that are working with customers understand their customers because they're right there with them. If you are able to and willing to hear back from them, then you have the best intelligence. It's on the ground floor. And that's how we learn. Industry data is important and interesting, but oftentimes it's historical, right? What we have the advantage of as a franchise system is much more real time.
Of course. And you also mentioned that at some point you guys discovered secret sauce.
Yes.
What was the secret sauce?
It was a combination of things. So this was back in 2003. We had been really perfecting the way we were doing things, including how we supported our franchisees, how we connected with them, how we trained them, all of those different elements we had been, we thought, perfecting. But it was putting it all together in a package that made sense and priced right is what got things going for us. So it wasn't an overnight. It was years and years of tweaking and changing and being like a mad chemist of moving things around and saying, is this going to work? Is that going to work? And until we were able to find and put it all together. And I'm telling you, pricing it appropriately is what happened.
Were you pricing it too low or too high? How did you figure out the pricing?
We realized that we were pricing it too low. Yeah, it was an increase in price that worked.
How did you realize that?
I think it was
testing and seeing how market reacts.
That was people attending different conferences and coming across different franchise systems. And the feedback was, wait, why are we lower than them? Because sometimes people perceive lower price as business op. They don't understand that it's a real business. So, yes.
Makes a lot of sense. So let's return to this period where you're going through a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
How did that change you? What did you understand about yourself during that period?
It was the most amazing gift that nobody has ever asked for. But once it's here, it's a gift. My family always say my life was life before my brain surgeries and life after. And the life after is so much better in every way. It was because I had to slow down just because I had to. And I couldn't really speak that well, so I had to listen more. I became an observant, not by choice, but by force. And being an observant was very enlightening. But I also had to deal with life and death, right? So the second time, I had 2 brain surgeries. The second time I was supposed to die, apparently. Didn't know that. And so after that one, which was, within 10 days, I had 15 hours of brain surgery. And the second one was basically to save my life. After that, I was very, very sick and I couldn't keep my balance. So I had to learn to walk. And the idea of 1 step forward and 2 step back, 1 step at a time, these cliches are not really cliches. They're like, that's exactly how it works. And one of my major principles that I share in my book too is my brain surgeon said to me, you heal by moving. Since the moment I was able to, I was expected to move with assistance, of course. If you combine all of those lessons, that's absolutely life-changing. How do you find your balance? How do you find your balance in life? How do you learn to be patient with setting smaller goals to reach bigger goals? The smaller goals was, can I take 2 more steps today, right? To someday be able to walk around. all of being an observant, listening, and then, of course, understanding the environment, all of those taught me to be much more in tune with life, with what I wanted, what I could see in people. I would say that all of my senses were heightened, down to the way I saw things and I felt things. And because of that, that when I recovered, I made fundamental changes in my life.
What were the changes you made?
So when it comes to business, because we're talking about business, it had become apparent that much like a lot of entrepreneurial companies, we had grown past the experience, expertise, know-how, or the desire of some people that were in the business, right? Because we were successful, we were doing well, company was making money, but nothing ever stays the same. You either continue to grow or you allow yourself to fall backwards. And we were in this strange situation where what we need to either kick it into gear and continue to grow, which was a much loftier goal than it would have been, right? Because the bigger the company, the harder it is to continue to grow it, or we would just have to call it a day. So I personally had to have some soul searching, and I brought it up to everybody, and I said, maybe it's time for us to consider selling, because for years we've been wanting to sell. Like ever since I came on board, everyone had a number in mind to sell at, which was much smaller than it ended up being when this conversation was being had. So everybody agreed because it was clear. It was clear that a lot of the energy, excitement, momentum wasn't there to push the company forward. So I set out to learn how to bring in private equity. What does that word look like? Took me a couple of years to land on the right bankers. And from that point, we started putting all of our ducks in a row for a transaction. The idea was, if we could sell it at a value that we were looking at. Because remember, we were not doing this because we were in some kind of a financial crisis. We weren't. But it was a crisis nevertheless. Like you can't not update your systems and your trainings and like not have, a lot of the work that needs to be done and expect things to be, hunky-dory. So it was through that process, we thought we were going to sell and everybody was going to leave, that we learned that we could find really good partners, but that they expected me to stay and run it to their expectation, which was the expectation we had set forth.
Makes a lot of sense. And what changes have you made in your personal life?
In my personal life, I have become so much more in tune and authentic with people that I invite into my life, people that I spend energy and time with. I have moved on from a marriage. I am remarried. And I've been so much more focused on making sure that I have my core values intact. And somebody at the company, when I was running it, one of our consultants said, well, you have a motto. And I go, what? I have a motto? She goes, yeah, you have a motto. I go, what is it? She says, you always say doing well by doing good. I go, that's it. You're right. I always say that. So point is, I decided to live by that motto. And by doing good, I don't only mean doing philanthropy or doing good by the community. I mean, good work, bring good products, do good, by others, be a good partner at work. Like a lot of ways of doing good. That also bled into my personal life, which is doing well by doing good.
With your book, for someone who is reading it, who will finish it, what are the key things you want people to take away?
I think probably some of the significant messaging in the book have to do with that regardless of circumstance, that it's possible. That it's possible to live, grow, build, accomplish what you envision. And that it's possible to do all of that while staying true to your core values, to your empathy, to your ability to connect with others, the two don't have to be mutually exclusive. And that you do heal by moving. That oftentimes, especially in a world, especially the world that we live in today, with a lot of change, a lot of challenge, if you're in a situation where you're transitioning from one phase of life to another, just basically change and challenge is always around, and it's picking up speed now, right? So in those circumstances of change and challenge, it can be confusing and demoralizing. The book explains that change and challenge may very well be your best friends if you know how to use them right. That's why I call it the superpower of adversity. It's not adversity for the sake of adversity. It's growing through it and from it. There's evidence of that in the book with examples of how it's applied to business multiple times, but also how it could be applied to your personal life. So basically, altogether, it's a book about hope, but it's not hope without specific guidance. There are lessons in there and principles in there that I share that I didn't create, I learned them. It's like the law of gravity. So when somebody discovers the law of gravity, it doesn't mean they created it. I didn't create these principles, but I've learned them over the years. And I'm doing this to be able to share it with others so that perhaps we can help each other. I can have an impact in potentially in allowing or helping others build what they're looking for, accomplish what they want, just be who they want to be by maybe applying some of those lessons, maybe finding some of it useful, effective in their lives.
What do you think one belief that you would want every listener to have ingrained in their heart and their mind?
That you can, because you can. That wherever you are in life, whether you're early on in your career or you're moving on to not working, if you're building a company from the ground up, or you're halfway through and you want to grow it from phase 1 to phase 2, or if you're taking on a new role, or if you're taking on a new phase, if you're taking on a new way of life, all of those circumstances are ones that are designed to help you grow and build what you can, but not what you can, what you desire. And that at the end of the day, you can. That's what it's about.
Shirin, and what will be your advice to leaders on how they should think about AI and how they should upskill themselves or whatever else they need to do to stay relevant and just to have a sense of well-being as things unfold?
Well, I always say a good leader is like an orchestra conductor. Your job is making sure that every musician is in the right seat, right? Somebody who knows how to play the violin shouldn't be playing the drums, or vice versa. The same is true in an organization. Your first job is to making sure that all of the players are in their right seats that's suited for them. They need to all have a playbook that they can use. Those are ways that their performance is measured, their guidance is done. And then your job is to harmonize as a conductor. Harmonizing meaning making sure that everybody understands where the company is going, the organization is going, that they work well together. One of those tools is AI. AI isn't just a tool, it's transformational if it's used right, utilized correctly. Your job as a leader is to making sure that the tool that's AI, the transformational tool that's AI, is weaved into those seats of these orchestra players, your organization, in a fashion that helps elevate and lift them and helps the organization as a whole achieve what it needs to do, which is the goal of, or the North Star of the organization. That is your job. So the question wouldn't be, in my opinion, that whether or not AI can help with one task or another, whatever that may be, but look at holistically as the organization and ask yourself, in what places and what forms can AI assist lift the company as a whole?
And what is your advice in terms of skills development, if you have anything additional to say on that?
Well, I think it's our job to continue to grow our skills, but you've got to make sure that you're focused on the skills that are meaningful to what you're trying to do, right? I'm never going to be a basketball player, so I'm not going to zoom in on skills, not to be ridiculous, but the same is within the organization. If you understand who you are and what value proposition you have, what is it that you bring to the organization, that's where you want to stay focused and make sure that you are the best at what you bring to the table. And places where you don't have either the skills or the passion or the desire are not consistent with you, you better make sure you have the right people in those places.
Shirin, thank you so much. Where can our listeners learn more about you, by your book, anything you want to share?
Oh, thank you. The book is called The Unexpected CEO, and it's available everywhere. It's also available on my website, which is shirinbehzadi.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram with the same Shirin Behzadi. Not an easy name to spell, but I'm sure you can do it.
Definitely. Our listeners definitely can do it. We have some of the most brilliant, amazing, hardworking people.
Amazing.
And we will have everything in the description as well.
Amazing. Well, the unexpected CEO is easier to remember, so maybe they can just start there and they'll find me.
Exactly. Yeah. Our guest today was Shirin Behzadi, author of The Unexpected CEO. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to connect with you all next time.